Hello, good morning, good evening, and good afternoon from all around the world. Welcome to Academy of Astrology AOA UK YouTube channel. Today is our great pleasure to have Lee and Wade join us to do a little bit of Capricorn English discussion. Hello, Lee. Hello, Wade.
Hi there.
It's so nice to have you too, because I know both of you are great into the mountain astrology and more like a different approach from me somehow. I know because it's more some you're taking it some like wait. I know wait when we talk about English chart, it's all about it's a very sharp, very interesting. Since first time I saw Wade talking about English chart, I was like, wow, I wish I can talk about the English chart like that. But the first at I would
You're
like
so
to
sweet. Oh my gosh.
first at all, I would like to share a little bit of news because I just saw Lee going to teach mountain astrology. I said, yes, finally some school put the mountain astrology on the program. I mean, this is so exciting. So Lee, I think Kepler College invited you to teach mountain astrology from January, right?
Yes, they've been reviewing their curriculum a little bit the last year, which is something I guess all of us in schools have to do periodically. And they did have a mundane course. They've kind of brought it a little more into focus in their program. And so they asked me to teach, and I was just delighted to be able to do so. In fact, when we get done here, I'll be cutting a little short promo for that. And I'm actually going to be looking in that, which will be free, anybody who's interested in this, at the charts for Kevin McCarthy and Mike Johnson. And how we can look at the two different speakers of the House, why this Congress has that, and what they have in common and what they don't. So I hope people will enjoy that. The course itself is going to be looking at just the general nuts and bolts of mundane, the difference in how you use the houses, for example, to natal. And we'll look at eclipses. We'll look at the series of greater conjunctions. We'll look at the Aries ingress series. We'll look at using the charts of countries or corporations, and we'll also compare that with the older system, which is looking at rulers. And here I don't mean rulers as in Cancer and Capricorn and Scorpio, but rulers as in kings, because we have some wonderful historical examples, for example, from John Gadbury, of looking at how to follow the course of a country through its king.
Wow, fantastic. How about from your side, Wade? I know there's a lot of courses running on SPA and the US Spatial Mountain Astrology Summit.
Yeah, sorry about that cough. I'm recovering from being sick this week.
Oh.
Yeah, so we have like a number of things that we do at the school. So there'll be an astronomy for astrologers course that's coming up in the spring. We're working at the moment on the development of a mundane course ourselves. So there will be something in the future sometime soon developed on that. We run horary courses multiple times per year in different time zones, and so that's available for those who are interested. And then we run events as well, every few years. So just recently, we had this idea for a few years about bringing together a bunch of people just to talk about mundane astrology. Let's give natal astrology a break for a little while, and let's talk about what's going on in the world. And we were able to run that as a school. So the World Astrology Summit, that was in September. Lee spoke there. Rod, you were there. So we had a mixture of mundane topics plus astrological forecasts for different nations. It was, I think, a great experiment. And we're going to be hosting a modified version of that again. And by we, it's not going to be with the STA anymore. This is, it's kind of taking its own legs and growing on its own. But there'll be something in the spring around March, the Aries ingress, the astrological holidays.
Definitely.
So, yeah, the Aries ingress is our high holiday, I think.
Definitely. So, everyone's so busy. But
yeah,
I'm really looking forward to this event. My experience to join this event was fantastic, great experience. So many different astrologers and really bring whole world together. Love this feeling. Thank you, Wade, to organize this. And then I'm really looking forward for the next March, different version. So, well, today we will focus on the Capricorn ingress, and then I think Lee has prepared something for us, right?
Well, at least it's got a few charts.
Lovely.
But I also thought that what I would do, Rod, is look at look at some information about how historically these were examined. And so we'll look at some current stuff and we'll look at some theory.
Lovely.
So this is basically the rule of interpreting ingresses, not just the Capricorn ingress. And this is material. You can find this in Abba Mashar. You can find it in Bonatti. So it's pretty well established in the history. Basically, one of the first things about interpreting ingresses was to look at the Aries ingress. And then what you would do is look to see whether the ascendant on that ingress is cardinal, fixed, or mutable, because that would tell you basically how much detail you needed as far as cardinal ingresses for the year. If that ascendant is cardinal, it means you really need to focus on all four, the Aries, the Cancer, the Libra, and the Capricorn. If the ascendant is mutable in that location, you need the Aries and the Libra for sure. And if it's fixed, you primarily can work with just the Aries ingress. So, I mean, now if we start to think,
Lee, is it possible that I could just add something? So when I was like teaching myself about ingress charts a few years ago, I can remember this is probably around 2015, 2016. I was starting to get interested in this because of the Trump election, right? Like the one where he came in and just how much chaos was surrounding that. I was like, I would be very curious to study this. One of the things that I noticed is that if you take the same location and you draw the Aries ingress, Cancer ingress, Libra ingress, Capricorn ingress, they have the same ascendants in the same midheavens for all of those, except the Libra ingress. The Libra ingress and the Aries ingress are different. But so for most of us, we tend to look at the Aries ones, some years Aries and Libra. We rarely look at all four. But when you see all four, that means when one of them has cardinal on an angle, 3 out of the 4 throughout the year are going to have cardinal signs on angles. So the whole year is reinforced with this rapid development change kind of symbolism, not just the Aries ingress. It gets repeated in summer and in winter, and then who knows what happens with the Libra one. But I just wanted to add that it's like whatever happens in the Aries ingress, it does get repeated on the other ingresses in terms of angle.
Yeah, now, and you'll see that with a couple of the examples I'm going to give you, because this is actually part of the way a whole year will lay out. Of course, obviously, other differences you have is the planets are going to move during the year. And so you'll have different placements of the other planets, and that's part of the issue. I think one of the things that this really raises up is that what we can do now, and, not that this wasn't being done, it hasn't been done for a while, but because of our computer tools, it's just so much easier. One of the things that I'll do when I'm looking at this whole question, this is from Solar Maps, from Esoteric Technologies, that's now part of Solar Fire. And so this is just, a world map showing the Aries ingress for 2023, the one we're in currently. And what you can do is when you know your planetary positions, and let me just shift forward here. Here on the left is the Aries ingress for 2023 in Washington, D.C. One of the first things that you want to do if you're working with this force system possibility is count up your, first look at the location. Now here you see that it was a Virgo rising chart for Washington, which would suggest this idea of using both the Aries ingress and the Libra ingress. Now, to drive you crazy, I've done the Aries and the Cap, because of course we're talking mainly about the Cap today, but talking about this theory of it. Now, one other way to conceptualize what this is saying as to how many ingresses you need to study, by implication, going back to our map, you can look and say, well, what were the angular planets in March for the Aries ingress? And by asking that question, going back to 2023, Aries, Jupiter was in Aries, Mercury was in Aries, the Sun was in Aries, and I have a notation here of Pluto was in Capricorn. Now, I wouldn't be using Pluto as a ruler, but in an astrocartography chart, here's the Pluto, one of the Pluto lines, ascendant, descendant lines, because it's curved like this. This is telling you that this is a zone where anything that was close to this would be indicating that this is an angle point. And so anything pretty much in that degree would tell you that the descendant line would be an angular place. So it's an easy way with the Aries ingress to pick out where are the areas where you're going to need all 4 ingresses. And if you know what all your planets are at the time, and this is just a little insert, I've squashed it down so you can see mainly the map. This will start to tell you what zones, especially on the MCIC lines, the straight lines, you're going to have this angularity that defines whether you need 1, 2, or 4 charts. And this in turn is also telling you something. When you need 4 charts, okay, one of those places was Brazil, okay. And 2023, there was a radical change in government. Now, we've seen several of them this year. We've seen, lots of them over the last 5 years, where you go from either a very heavily more liberally based to conservative based to liberal and back and forth. The kind of change where basically the two sides, well, let's be honest, hate each other. And you can kind of anticipate, and we've certainly seen with Brazil this year, a lot of changes that have been a result of just a regime change. I mean, we don't need to look in this case for an external event. If you follow the politics of what's going on in Brazil, you're just nodding your head and saying, well, of course. And that's one of the reasons I think this system is very interesting, is because it does give you this kind of immediate sense of the year that there are hot places. And so these are places where you might want to then spend more time. Another hot place this year, India. That's Delhi, and you're looking for the capital. In the United States, that chart I showed you for very briefly is a Virgo rising chart for the US. That's for Washington, D.C. But if you were to relocate that Aries ingress to the West Coast, to San Francisco and Los Angeles, Jupiter was one of the angular charts in the Aries ingress. So you see you've got angular positions here for the West Coast, for Vancouver in Canada. And of course, that line goes all the way up. So you have that going for the West Coast. But those aren't the normal mundane charts we'd use, because we'd only be looking at that if we were looking at what's going on with the state of California, not the country of the US. So that's another part of how you look at this. Now, here, Washington, as I said, you probably only use the Aries and the Libra charts. But this is showing what Wade was mentioning before. And if you see my book, Astrology and Sustainability, which is mainly about mundane, you'll see quite a few examples where I did all 4 ingress charts for the year. And you'll see exactly that pattern, that typically 3 of them have very similar ascendants. I didn't even do this for Wade's benefit, but but you see
I realized I could have kept my mouth shut. You were going to get there anyway.
Yeah, but great that you brought it up. And this also kind of gives you a kind of a picture of that here between the Aries and the Cap, that, the angles are very similar, but the planetary placements within the chart are going to be different. And so that's what's going to be interesting about the chart. So, the house rulership's similar, but the planets themselves, you're going from what's basically an 8th house sun in the Aries ingress to a 4th house sun in the Cap ingress. So that's Washington. Here, just by contrast, here's London. So we had to think of you, Rod. And so now here you've got a fixed sign on the ascendant for the Aries ingress. So that would say that for England and this slice of the world that I'm sharing with you, Rod, just further south, it's a single ingress chart. But we can also look, and if you do run the Cap ingress chart for the area and want to look at a few more things on a slightly micro level, you've got Scorpio rising here and Scorpio rising here, and this is typical, maybe 2 to 4 degrees difference on the ascendant. So this is what you see here. And then going back to what I mentioned, here's India. And and I'm looking.
Oh, I think this is London again.
Is this London again? Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
I'm looking at this and saying, wait a minute, that's not a cardinal thing. I just put the wrong chart in. Here's Tokyo, which will illustrate it. you've got Tokyo, you've got an Aries rising chart. So again, the 4 angles, and that's what was showing off of the astrocartography map. That in this year you have this slice that goes through South America, and it does go through India, even if I don't have the chart here. But it goes through a slice of Asia. It also hits Australia. I think you'd mentioned Australia before.
Yeah.
Wade, was it? I think. And Australia also has all 4 angles because it's a cardinal chart. So again, that suggests it gives you thought about how that's going to work for you.
Yeah. Well, that I agree that when I study in the faculty, when we study among them, it's just a very simple, just tell you run all the 4 charts, and then I finally when I hear I think Lee's talk and Wade's talk, I think Wade will be the first one maybe mentioned about that, and I was because you mentioned that in the summer school, and I was like, oh wow, I have this fun thing we could do, so make a different chart, and then depend on the ascendant, and then make a different choice. I think that was so interesting.
Yeah,
So
well, I think the thing, if I can just add one comment in this,
yes.
the reason that we pay attention to the Aries ingress, you got to think about what the Aries ingress is all about. Why is it such a big deal? It's the sun is the natural significator of rulers and leaders and people in positions of power, and also on like a seasonal basis, when the sun grows in light and gets higher in the sky, more develops and more grows on the earth. So there's this kind of expectation that when we take an Aries ingress, we are studying where the rise of solar virtue will be dispensed over the course of the year, because that's that symbolic moment, and we've centered it on there. But similarly, the sun moving into any of these cardinal signs is going to have a story to tell about what's happening with leaders and principles of growth around the world. So when the sun enters Libra, it's a very different type of story that talks about the sense of that image, and it's constantly vacillating. So even, in Cancer, that represents the highest point of the sun's position. It's, these cardinal points are very similar to the lunar nodes, like Aries and Libra would be analogous to the north and south node. And then Cancer, Capricorn would be analogous to the bendings. So anyway, my point in this is like, we also then look at new and full moons, because then we shift the focus from leadership to the public and to the people. And so these are like a marriage between how these things come together. So whether you use only the Aries ingress or all 4, like you learned at the faculty, or apply a traditional principle to be selective about which ones, at the end of the day, we're all kind of looking at the same thing. And sometimes it's helpful to look at less, but they all have something powerful to give, so it's not a bad thing to look at all.
I quite like your idea, and it does make sense when you're talking about the English chart about sun's position, and we focus on the leader, and then when we talk about new moon, full moon, we can focus more on the people and the society. That is pretty great idea. I like that idea. Well, should we jump into maybe before we start talk about Capricorn English, maybe have a quick review on the Aries English chart for the for Washington area, and then maybe have some idea.
Yeah, I can. I need to pull that up. Give me just a moment. I thought that I had that in front of me, but I don't. 2023, here we go. And we'll just bring that into here. Okay, so here it is. Lee, do you have any thoughts on this particular chart?
Well, in about 10 days, I'm going to be speaking on 2024 for OPA.
OPA, yes.
So my mind has suddenly shifted to 20.
I know it's been a while. I think that looking at this chart, I think that there's quite a lot now in retrospect that we can see hinting towards themes of war, international scuffle, problems, and that I'm thinking about the fact that there are mutable signs on the angles indicates that there's back and forth kind of issues throughout the year, but the moon's angular applying to a square with Mars. The moon's in the 7th house, showing a lot of activity in other nations at this time. And we came into this year knowing we were already giving money to fund Ukraine's response towards Russian aggression, correct? and new challenges have arisen. One of the principles that come out pretty strongly in Ramsey's work is that in any year where Mars is angular, you can expect themes of war and drums of war. The thing is, it's so much stronger of a principle when you have a luminary in an angle applying to that Mars. And here the moon is doing this from the 7th, which is already stirring up this like conflict coming as a result of interference in foreign nations and what else is done. I mean, the moon is exalted in Taurus on the 9th cusp, so now the 9th and the 7th get connected in this type of way. And I have thoughts about, like obviously we're aware of the situation in Israel and Palestine at the moment, conflict that has been going on for quite some time, and the symbolism that has been drawn. There's not necessarily like the strongest connections to this Aries ingress because that particular struggle is over a century old, and it's going to connect more strongly with local astrology and things going on there. However, this whole thing really kicked off on a Mars opposition to this Jupiter. Then there was the eclipse that happened at 21 degrees of Aries. And these things, picked up this very awkward axis in the US Aries ingress chart this year. But also just recently sorry, Lee, did you want to jump in?
Well, we can jump back and forth. It doesn't matter. I was also going to point out that you notice that Mars is in a bicorporeal sign. And that's another thing with immutability. This does have an implicit idea that there's more than one war site possible.
Well, and it's also in Gemini. So part of it here is like that this is the kind of battle that stirs up blood between brothers,
Yes.
even
the symbolism works every which way on this. I think also, another thing, and this kind of illustrates one of the points. Now, this is for Washington. The fact that this is Virgo rising, hence a mutable sign, hence the emphasis on the Libra chart as well as the Aries chart. What that's basically saying is the page turns in the fall. And so that also matches with, when things started to heat up. So that's, after the fact, you can usually see, well, duh, of course I needed a second chart for this. And here's why. I think one of the things that I think is very good for all of us to do is when you start following some of the New Year predictions, routinely and kind of regularly, where you can make note of, what was predicted last year. And, and you can compare it, and you can also at the end of the year say, now, does this still make sense? Because that's what we're doing here with the Aries ingress. Does this still make sense to us? Another issue besides the Mars angular, which, is such a strong indication that war is possible, the sun at the 8th house cusp.
Yeah. Well, good points on that. Sorry, I froze because I was thinking for a moment I just was taking in the sun on the 8th house cusp kind of theme. There's been so many years where there have been these signatures that indicate failing health for Biden. And it's when you just said that, I was kind of remembering this. We also came into this year. Well, one of the things I was going to mention earlier was like, okay, we've got this war front happening now with Israel and Palestine. And we've just heard news that Biden has told Netanyahu and his administration that Israel is losing the support for this war. So the conversation and the tone of the conversation is starting to turn, it feels like, but we'll see where that goes. There's also been some dust kicked up in Venezuela and Guyana, like at a very high level. Here's the deal. Guyana was under control of the Dutch until the British eventually pushed them out. Venezuela was under the control of the Spanish. These are European colonial battles, the legacy of which is still being worked out. Both of these, like Venezuela, became an independent nation in the 19th century, and then Guyana would eventually become independent from the United Kingdom. But the United Kingdom started these negotiations. There was a battle for this territory between a river and I think I actually don't know what's to the west, but whatever, from a river on. And Guyana has said, this is ours, and Venezuela said, no, this is ours. In 1899, it was decided by a tribunal that it belonged to Guyana, and then it was reaffirmed in 1966. But Venezuela never really was on side with that. They felt that the bodies that decided this had no jurisdiction in this area, and that the voting was already going to favor the British rather than an independent Venezuela. So Venezuela never took this on board. Now, this conflict was recently brought back up in 2018 because Guyana is asking for a final determination on this from the International Court of Justice. And the president, Maduro in Venezuela, yeah, he's not terribly popular right now. And so he's trying to do there's presidential elections coming up next year. And some analysts are thinking that what's happening is he's doing everything he can to stir up conflict, to postpone, maybe even war, to postpone the election at a time where he might have better odds of winning. And one of the things that got kicked up was a referendum was put towards the people. Is this region, do we recognize the International Court of Justice's jurisdiction to determine whether this is Venezuela or Guyana's territory? And question number 2, should we basically annex this area and build a new state on this land? And that one, I think, was like 95% approval, drumming up this nationalist kind of, but this is an issue because Guyana is an American ally. Venezuela is in kind of tough position. So now we're hearing that the United States is conducting military exercises in the sea areas around Venezuela and Guyana. So this is now another place where any of these issues. So if we talk about what's happening in India and China with their border dispute in the Himalayas, if we talk about what's happening between Venezuela, Guyana, Israel and Palestine, Russia, Ukraine, any one of these could set off World War III at any moment. And they all have their unique signatures. I'm talking about this Guyana Venezuela thing because the US has decided to get involved. And the referendum, I want to show you the new moon or the full moon that happened just before this referendum. And you can see the moon is in opposition to the sun at 4 degrees Sag and Gemini, opposition with Mars, square with Saturn. What's really fueling this and why Venezuela cares about this land so much is because it was found to be very, very rich in oil deposits. I personally give oil to Saturn for just high level reasons. It's made over millions of years. It's pitch black. It's made from bones and fossils that have decayed over time. It's poisonous to actually use. It does fuel things, but it is a poison effectively. Everything about and the wealth it generates tends to backfire on the general public. It does it for the aristocratic class, the older, old money. Everything about it feels Saturnian to me. So this square between, sun, moon into Saturn, Mars there too, shows us kind of kick up about these things. But it's this 4 degrees of the mutable sign that really captured my attention because that was right on the MC-IC axis. So I suspect that this issue is not going to be, over next year when we've got the April 8th eclipse. It's bringing the same angles both in Venezuela and in the US. So there's a lot of things that are worth talking about. But when we think about like the Capricorn ingress, that's the same, remember, because we have the same angles, that same conflict is going to show up on the midheaven and IC. So one part about this is it does make it a little bit challenging to identify when these things are like most likely to kick off, when all of these angles are going to be the same, in these time periods. But it's still a conflict worth watching. Let me pause there and just see what Lee's thinking, because I don't want to take over.
You're doing fine, Wade.
Yeah.
I absolutely agree with you. I had when I was writing Astrology of Sustainability, one of the major themes in there was oil and petroleum. And I had been looking at the period in the 19th century, both the original development of resources in Europe, which is where basically the original petroleum mining was occurring, and then the developments primarily in the United States and a portion of Canada as far as learning to drill for oil, which was a new technology. And it was actually that drilling for oil technology that then became drilling for water when you talk about the development of things like fracking and also just the ability to work with groundwater. Looking at those charts, my conclusion was that you had to include Mars in the process as well as Saturn. And if you like outer planets, Pluto did seem to have some relevance, although,
Yeah, I wondered about that. I know that
and those three together were popping up all over the place with the technologies that were developed to utilize these resources. And and that makes sense because you think about the fuel piece, obviously, is one of them. And all the issues that now, and this also works with beautifully with Saturn, of course, the carbon footprint.
Yeah.
Which is so Saturn when you think about it.
Yeah. So also, we came into this year, if everyone remembers, we came into this year off the back of Roe versus Wade being kind of turned over and issues of abortion rights. And I had hoped, looking at this chart, in a previous year, there was a lot of like Venus was besieged. Venus, I think the angles are very similar. Venus ruled or was placed in the ninth house. I think Venus was maybe in the ninth between Mars and Saturn in the Aries ingress of 2022. And many astrologers wrote, this looks like, access to women's health care or, general reproductive care, things like that, because it's Venus. And sure enough, that's what ended up coming out in the courts when the sun and moon and I think Venus were transiting Taurus at that time. And then, now we see that signature in the 2023 Aries ingress. And I think Venus in the ninth, I had been hopeful that we might have seen some rolling back of the intensity of that. And we did in some states. There was more constitutional law, like state constitutions enshrining the right to access to that type of care. But I don't know that it was as overwhelming as, particularly hoped for. What I'm watching right now, though, with respect to the ninth house and this making an application to Jupiter, I just wrote about this like a couple of weeks ago for the Skyscript newsletter when I was talking about Jupiter stationing direct. And I was talking about Jupiter being the upper class nobility, if we want to take that route, particularly in white collar institutions, and Jupiter naturally is associated with universities as well as a result. So I had written about, I think that this Israel-Palestine kind of conflict was going to land pretty poorly on the shoulders of university presidents. At that time, there were already one or two letters circulating, and I think this is going to become a bigger deal. And by now, it has become a bigger deal. There are congressional hearings. We've had university presidents who have had to step down, who are being asked to step down. We have boards and presidents that are in conflict with one another. And so this, I think, retrograde period is likely to continue to kick up dust for people in these positions.
Ouch. And look at that. Look at that Venus ruling the ninth house in the third house with detriment.
Right opposite Uranus. Yep, and it's opposite Uranus.
Yeah, opposite Uranus.
And it's angry.
Yeah, very much so.
It's very angry.
Yeah,
very much so. And Jupiter.
I think that when I was looking at the hearings, one of the things that had struck me is, here you definitely have the ninth house rulership of higher education, and that's still holding. But one of the things that's odd is university presidents are basically just fundraisers anymore.
Yes, I just said
they're not involved in policy.
Yeah.
And so it's an interesting thing to see this process of trying to go at this through people who on a daily basis aren't having anything to do with it.
Yeah, right. That's a very good point, and a very Jupiterian image in that also, I think.
Yeah.
Yes.
Something else I wrote about for the Skyscript newsletter that might be worth, just kind of bringing a little bit of attention to is that they're around this Jupiter station. While Jupiter has been retrograde, the US has had so many issues related to farming and agriculture. There has been a number of projection misses, billions falling out of the market at this stage, a lot of concerns about the health of product. There have been in numerous places outbreak. I think in Canada there were millions of birds that had to be put down due to avian flu. And, while Jupiter goes retrograde in earth signs, there tends to be great disruption in agricultural markets. That's kind of where I'm going with this. So I'm focusing on the US, but no, there's Canada had issues with this. Many nations around the world are reporting issues. But Jupiter within this Capricorn ingress will be stationing direct. In fact, it's stationing or very close to its station point at the time of the ingress.
Yes.
making its trine. And when Jupiter was in Virgo, when Jupiter was in Capricorn, and now when Jupiter is in Taurus, and when it's retrograde, in all of those times, agricultural markets dipped, debt portfolios for farmers and for agricultural subsidies started to look very alarming. There was concern about supply demand economics and how these things meet, food waste, access also, like right now in Europe and in like Northern and Eastern Africa, Western Africa too, but there's a lot of concerns about food limitations and how food can move and trade at this time. That happened while Jupiter was retrograde in all of the Earth signs. And once it stationed direct within a few weeks of that, good news started to pop back up again. It's been like 4 years since Jupiter was in Capricorn. And I wasn't really paying close attention then, to this, but I'm watching it now. And it's been interesting to see how this kind of transitions around the stations. So I'm hoping that with Jupiter stationing direct throughout this period, for those who are involved in agricultural industries, that they can see an improvement of their realities.
Wow. Another thing we can see also in this Aries chart is Mars in the fourth. And, normally, we talk, for example, in horary about Mars in the second as having a very destructive effect on your finances. Well, Mars in the fourth, it can have a very destructive effect on your land, when it comes to mundane charts. And certainly the kind of weather that was characteristic in the United States in the summer was worse than usual, even in our global warming new normal. So that's another thing that you can look at as far as being, a concern. I mean, the malefic in a time such as we are in right now, where, these are not the fun days by anybody's stretch. You look forward to the next few years, and I'm not optimistic in the sense of suddenly expecting like that people are going to have such wonderful years over the next few years. It's going to make up for all this stuff since 2020. No, but in these times, what this also means is that you have to pay attention to where the malefics are, because they are definitely going to show you areas where there are going to be problems.
Thank you, Lee.
Yeah, I think this chart also gives a little bit of a wink towards something in 2024. Whenever I see 20 degrees of Gemini or Sagittarius activated, it's a Trump kind of thing that I'm thinking about.
Yes.
His eclipse on that degree, his lunar eclipse. And I know that there's a lot in the news at the moment about, what's going on with his court case. And there's, shall we take it straight to the Supreme Court so we don't have to worry about appeals and this, that, the other. And so, that's all moving. And this seems to be a period that's probably going to be yielding some unfavorable results for him, because this is Mars, it's Mars transiting his stuff. But he's got Mars angular also, like in a fire sign as well. He tends to lean into that energy pretty comfortably and take that on and actually somehow turn it into fire that other people then have to fight. And when we come out of this Capricorn ingress, the next one that we face is the Aries ingress 2024, which puts his natal ascendant in Mars right on the midheaven of this chart. And, Mars in opposition to his natal Mars. So I think that we need to take, last time he ran, there wasn't a lot of taking very seriously his possibility to become the nominee, nor taking very seriously his possibility of winning. And I think that we have to allow the astrology to speak the way that it needs to. And so that he's going to be a character on the world stage next year, whatever happens. And so it'll be worth watching, throughout this period, what kind of signatures are showing up when there are developments in his story,
Wow.
I had noticed back in the 2020 election, actually it was the 2016 election, excuse me, in the 2016 election, that the model that I've been working for years has been a model of trying to work these into a quantitative system based on some of the ancient rules of warfare. And afterwards I try to look and see, did it, either in terms of yes or no, but are there factors that I hadn't considered? And when for 2016, all of my indicators were 50-50. And so afterwards I said, did I miss anything? And one morning, again, the kind of things you can do because of the computers now, I did a run of looking at all the elections where Saturn was in Sagittarius. And, this should be just so simplistic that it's meaningless, right? Wrong. Every time that the election has taken place with Saturn and Sagittarius, the Republicans won. So, it's interesting because you keep finding these little microclimate things that are still giving you ideas after how many elections.
Well, and I think you kind of pick up on a useful reminder of why, like, making predictions with mundane astrology, it's such an important thing to be careful with.
Yeah.
It feels good to be able to call something right, and sometimes you can because you can see enough things coming together. Like, for instance, like Elon Musk and his kerfuffle with purchasing Twitter. Anybody following the astrology of that knew that that was going to bite him in the ass. Like, it was so clear. It was
Yeah.
constant opposition energy with Mars and Saturn. It was bad. It was like everything about it was moving in a direction that looked damaging to him. And so you can call those kinds of things. But there's also this recognition that at any moment, an unforeseen element in the story that you didn't know to look for or didn't exist before but exists now can jump in and create an entirely new cycle of signatures that the situation will start to play out on. And so it could be like I track things that like, right. So I know that 4 degrees of that of
Yes.
Gemini Sagittarius is going to activate that Venezuela Guyana conflict. I know that. But if I go far enough back, that signature wasn't the main one. And if I go into the future, it'll be different too. Right now, that's the one that's kicking off. And the reason is because it connects in with Maduro's presidency. He got the year that he came in. Those were, degrees on angles. So would that happen if it was another president? No, probably not. It would be a different layer of signatures. So we have to, I think, remember that our work is investigative. Like economists, we take what we can think to bring to the table, and we hope we didn't leave anything out, but we might at any time. And so it's very normal for people to make, calls on mundane astrology and not hit the mark. And how could you think that you always would? There's a whole world out there of things that we don't
Yes,
know.
indeed.
So it's sometimes just helpful, I think like Lee said, that just continue to be open to exploring for these little micro signatures that exist that, might be the kind of thing that helps you understand what's in play.
Definitely, definitely. Well, thank you, Wade, and thank you, Lee. It's a fantastic experience to listen you two chatting about this because I have to stay silent first. I've been talked too much for the last couple of weeks, and then you guys met was fantastic. I was about to make a lot of notes. I really enjoy you two talking, and then I mean it's fantastic. And then listen to how you look at the chart. Also, give me some inspiring. Especially, I think I really like that when you showing the chart about. I think it's probably it was in the Capricorn English chart, and then they're showing the same situation about the university, the night rule, the Venus rule, the nice and opposite Uranus, and the third nice like this. Wow, that is and that 4 degree. I like what you say. Yes, because that triggered Maduro when he was become presidency, and if not him, maybe someone else, that would be something else. And apparently, at this moment, we have the new president for the Argentina. That bring another uncertainty again into this world. Well, some people did mention about during his election, he was talking about he want to take Falkland Island back. With like, oh, fun! That you really don't want to go that because that we have a lot of trouble now, and if we can't go there, that is no end. That we there no end. And quite interestingly, when you show us the Aries English chart about next year, and that with all Trump's degree. Oh la la, that is going to be hard. Thank you, Lee, and thank you, Wade. Let me repeat again. Well, Lee's course on mundane astrology on the Kepler College will start on the 14th of January. If you are interested in learning mundane astrology, that would be the one you have to go to follow. Please contact Kepler College. And then STS always great, the best course for the horary astrology. And then we also can expecting this mundane World Astrology Summit. I'm really looking forward to that. Thank you, Lee, and thank you, Wade, to join us today. And the next week we will bring up some big stars to talk to you. Okay, so thanks everyone. See you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Oh, we just jump out.
That's great.
Yeah.